Hi, everyone. Welcome to another one of our Academic Success webinar series. I am Ashley Bray. I'm the Disability and Learning Skills Advisor for the School of Continuing Studies. I have with me my colleague, Annie Bolott. She is the Learning Skills Specialist for Main Campus. We're both part of the Academic Resource Center. And today we are going to be talking about critical thinking. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You can find out more about our office and all of our wonderful academic support resources on our website, and that's at academicsupport.georgetown.edu. There you can find, as I mentioned, downloadable academic resources on time management, study skills, note-taking, final exams as we're getting into the end of the semester. There we also have our drop-in foreign language tutoring hours for those students on main campus. We have links to other campus resources, including student health and CAPS, and all of our archived ARC newsletters, as well as our archived webinars from the past 4 semesters. Just to make sure you stay up to date with us, you can follow us on Instagram at ARC_Georgetown or on Facebook at ARC Georgetown. And here is the schedule for the rest of the semester for our webinars. All of our webinars will be held on the same Zoom link. So what you use to log in today, go ahead and use that to join us for the rest of the semester. They'll all be on 1:00 p.m. Our next webinar will be Wednesday, March 27th, and that will be a little bit of a career-focused webinar. We'll be rounding out this semester with a study groups webinar on Tuesday, April 16th at 1, and then as always, ending with a conversation about final exams on Wednesday, April 24th, right before we get into study days. And as I mentioned, you can find all of our old archive webinars from this semester and past semesters on the website. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive in today, and I think a good place to start is defining what is critical thinking. And critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. And that's from the Foundation for Critical Thinking. So that was a lot in one definition, but essentially, critical thinking is deliberately and systematically processing information, right? And that's really what we're going to look at here, is how are we deliberately and systematically processing information as it relates to our academics, as it relates to our coursework. So talking through the application of critical thinking, the first thing is you're probably already practicing critical thinking in your current coursework. So even if it's something that you're aware of doing, hopefully you'll be aware by the end of this webinar, but it's something you're probably already actively doing. And like what we mentioned, critical thinking is more than just memorizing facts and equations and names. It's processing through the content, and you're deliberately employing intellectual tools, right? So we talk a lot about tools and resources and actively engaging in our coursework. That same thing applies to critical thinking. You're actively using tools to reach more accurate conclusions. Critical thinking is a great way to also help you evaluate your own work. One of the things that Annie and I talk a lot about in our work with students and on these webinars is how are we talking about self-assessment? And I think that's something we'll go into a little bit later in the webinar, but it helps you evaluate your own work. It kind of tells you where you are, where you need to be, and maybe some areas that you need to focus on, and of course the areas that you're doing really well in. Engaging in the critical thinking process helps you become more comfortable with the material and creates a deeper understanding. And I think if any takeaways from this webinar, that's probably one of the most important. I think students share a lot with us that the more comfortable they are with the material, the more they interact with the material, is something we say a lot. The more you interact with it, the more confident you become in it. And so you're less nervous in the classroom, you're less nervous on exams, and it just kind of comes more naturally to you. And that experience really kind of reverberates out into your other classes and your other academic and professional work.
Okay. And one thing before we move on, and I really liked what Ashley just ended with about how critical thinking allows us to understand material at a deeper level. It really helps with retention too. So we don't want you just to learn the information one time, memorize a fact, and then throw it away or not remember it for the long term. But we really want you to understand the material at a deeper level, engage with it, think through the process of how you got to those conclusions or how you got to that answer, so that you are engaging with it and it stays with you for the rest of the semester and even into a more advanced coursework that you are taking here at Georgetown. So thinking about the ways to think critically, okay? So the skills that we need in order to be able to think critically are varied, and they include some of the following: observation, analysis, interpretation, reflection, evaluation, inferences, explanation, problem solving, and decision making. Okay, so those are just some things to think about when we're talking about critical thinking. Those are the types of words that we are really focusing on and the ways that we want to be able to develop this type of skill set. So just some examples to think about more specifically is, how are you thinking about a topic or an issue in an objective and critical way? Can you identify different arguments that are related to a particular issue? Can you look at both sides of an argument, maybe look at the pros and the cons of the argument, and evaluate a decision or a problem for all the different facets of that particular issue? Evaluate a point of view to determine how strong or valid it is. Can you recognize weaknesses or negative points that there are in evidence for an argument? Maybe you can provide structured reasoning and support for an argument that you want to be able to make. So those are just some specific tangible examples about ways that you can think critically. And some additional ones, of course, problem solving, looking at the different solutions that could come from a certain issue or a certain problem. Can you make deductions from a theory or a concept to deduce, why is it this way, or why do people think about it this way? Can you evaluate an argument and look at, again, the pros and cons, and look at the different points of view that people bring to the table? All of these things we really want you to think about during your lectures, and that's something that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper coming up here. But thinking about this isn't just something that we want to theoretically talk about. We want you to really implement these in the classrooms so you get more from the classroom experience, you engage with your teachers, your TAs and peers, and again, you really understand the material better and you retain it for a longer period of time. And the one thing I want to hit home before I move on is critical thinking is the opposite of regular everyday thinking. Okay, so a critical thinker, here are just some, again, a few more things that we want you to think about when it comes to being a critical thinker. So we want you to be able to raise questions, formulate them clearly and precisely. Really what I would be focused on is just the act of raising questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions during lecture or discussion if something is unclear to you, or if you want to deepen your understanding of it, maybe ask about the process behind it, or ask about what the steps leading up to that answer were. Really ask your professor, engage your peers into thinking more critically and deeper into concepts and things that are being discussed in class. Gather and assess relevant information. Think open-mindedly and communicate effectively. So thinking about how can we really engage our peers, engage in the classroom in a deeper way. Some other things to think about too is, can you formulate understandings between ideas? Can you understand the connection between certain ideas? Can you bring that to the conversation in the classroom? Maybe that's not part of the conversation, but can you provide that insight to help other people understand the material better? Can you determine the importance and relevance of arguments and ideas? Identify inconsistencies and errors in reasoning, and approach problems in a consistent and systematic way. So just some examples of things that we would encourage you to think about as a critical thinker, and hopefully we can translate these to the classroom and some applicable strategies that you can use in your coursework.
All right, to build off what Annie shared, just some examples of the critical thinking process. Define the terms used, and these are things that you're probably already seeing in your work, in your exams, that you're hearing from your professors. And so thinking through this lens now to kind of clue in and realize these are the points that you should be critically thinking about, of how are you engaging and interacting with that material in a more substantial way than just memorizing facts. So define the terms used in this test and explain their meaning, right? So instead of just having that memorizing that definition, how are you taking that definition and making it applicable to other parts of what you're using? How can you connect those terms to other terms or larger theories in your textbook or things you've discussed in class? Analyze information from multiple perspectives and from different angles. And on the last slide, we talked a little bit about one of the core components of critical thinking is thinking with an open mind. And so that's really important when you're analyzing information from different angles. Kind of, thinking about things in the reverse, taking when you're writing pro and con essays, taking both sides of an argument, pushing back on questions. That's really helps kind of engage your brain in a different way. And so you're able to interact with material in a deeper, more profound manner. Deconstruct problems into easier to manage elements. And this is something we discuss with students all the time as just a really solid academic strategy to use. How are you breaking things down into more manageable pieces, right? Just like we talk about breaking down your study schedule into more manageable chunks, but how are you taking larger problems, larger issues in class and really breaking it down from that very macro perspective to a very, very micro perspective, and then applying that through individual lenses from different perspectives. Elaborate on various answers. Again, list the pros and cons. Looking at different sources, right? This is, again, another strategy we talk about all the time. Your information should just not be from one source. When you're studying, are you looking at information from your textbooks, your lectures? Are your notes highlighted? Have you starred important points? Professional writings, notes from office hours with your professors? Are you meeting in study groups and comparing information? Are you seeing themes in those study groups? Or are you seeing different viewpoints? And maybe you need to go back and critically think through a different lens. So these are just some examples of the critical thinking process that you're probably already utilizing and seeing in your classroom experience. All right, and so again, here are some ways to apply critical thinking skills in the classroom. Active engagement in lectures, right? One, you probably already should be doing this for participation points, but how are you framing questions, right? If someone asks a question, can you reframe that question through a different lens? Can you put that into context to a larger theory that you've learned? Are you talking about things within the pros or cons? So really staying actively engaged in lectures. And maybe you're not, someone who likes to ask a lot of questions in the classroom. Are you writing down those questions in your notes? Are you taking the bullet points and the main themes from your chapters in your textbooks, and are you using that as a lens to kind of look through and engage in lecture in? So I think that this is a really, really important one. Again, ask different types of questions. Describe how you arrived at your answer. I think one of the most important tools that we have for students in the classroom is explaining the process of how they got to that point and understanding how their peers or maybe their TA or their professor also got to that point. So again, that's looking at things through that different viewpoint. And the way you can do that is really describing how you arrived there, what your thought process was, what are the main points that you were thinking about, and write those things down. So when you come back to it, you can still engage in that material and still be thinking critically. feedback is a huge part of the learning process. And it's also a huge part of the critical thinking process, especially in the classroom. So how are you asking for feedback from your peers, your professors, your TAs to correct or refine thinking? Again, this is the place where I'm going to hammer in that you should be utilizing your professor's office hours, or you should be utilizing study groups, or drop in foreign language tutoring if you're in a foreign language program. But feedback is critically important and something that we should be asking for throughout our academic careers. Interacting with your notes, again, more than just taking notes. How are you kind of coding your notes in a way that makes sense to you? How are you developing questions from those notes to go back and ask to your professors or to engage in active classroom discussion? How are you taking those notes and relaying that information back to your readings, the work that you've done previously, or maybe research that's up and coming? And again, to go hand in hand with feedback, self-assessment. Self-assessment is a huge part of critical thinking. So having the self-awareness to say, this is what I'm doing really well in, these are some areas maybe I need to spend some more time, kind of constantly self-assessing is a huge part of that academic engagement process and a huge part of critical thinking. And then again, the last two, reversing the problem. So looking at things through that different lens is really, really important, and utilizing your peer groups to, again, help you look through different perspectives and really make sure you're engaging in a way, engaging with material in a way that's meaningful and connects with you and resonates with you, so you're able to produce on exams or in papers or in the classroom.
And Ashley, I think the one really great point, again, with going off of utilizing peer groups, is one of the best retention strategies is teaching material out loud or teaching material to somebody else. So if you can combine asking different types of questions, maybe you aren't comfortable asking questions in the classroom, but can you write down those different levels of questioning and take it to your peer group to see what is everyone else's understanding of the material? And maybe they can fill in a hole of information that you have, and then you can provide information that they might be lacking as well. And that's where, again, we are really engaging in that deeper process rather than just being a passive recipient of information. We really want students to be an active participant, that's the word, in their own learning and really be actively engaged. So I think we can't stress that enough, and hopefully a lot of these tangible skills can be translated to the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Annie, is how are you being an active participant in your own learning? And one way to really check that is utilizing those peer groups. So again, I know a lot of students come to us, and I think sometimes peer groups form naturally in the classroom. Sometimes they're more structured in their responses, but look for your peers in those academic courses that you can bounce ideas off of, look at things through a different lens, because you're really actively engaging in the material in that way, and sometimes it doesn't even feel like studying. All right. So today we spent some time talking about critical thinking. As always, we hope you will join us for our next webinar that's more of a career focus, but we would love if you would spend some time to give us back on our feedback survey about other topics that you want to see covered in webinars, or any questions that you may have. If you do have questions, you can always get in touch with Annie or myself individually to set up an individual consultation. And please make sure you're utilizing those resources on our website. We have a lot of great resources up there, and we hope to see you all back here on March 27th for our next webinar. Have a great day.